these days of doubt and worry, where darkness threatens to take hold, I believe my God is greater. I know you hold me. I will not bow to things uncertain. Your faithfulness won't be denied. Steadfast in the fiercest battle, Lord, you hold me and you go before me. I choose to look beyond the chaos. I choose to seek the Savior's promise that even in this madness, my world will not be shaken, because you hold me and you go before me. Lord, you hold me and you go before me. You are my strength when I am weary. Your perfect love will never fail. My anxious heart need not be fearful, because you hold me and you go before me. I choose to look beyond the chaos, and I choose to seek the Savior's promise that even in this madness, my world will not be shaken, because you hold me and you go before me. Lord, you hold me and you go before me. Your great love, it will never fail. Your great love, it will never fail. There's a breaking dawn on the horizon, a shining light on the horizon. Your great love, it will never fail. Your great love, it will never fail. There's a peace restored on the horizon, calmer seas on the horizon. Your great love, it will never fail. Your great love, it will never fail. There's a breaking dawn on the horizon, shining light on the horizon. Your great love, it will never fail. Your great love, it will never fail. There's a better day on the horizon, a brighter hope on the horizon. Your great love, it will never fail. Your great love, it will never fail. There's a breaking dawn on the horizon, a shining light on the horizon. Your great love, it will never fail. Your great love, it will never fail. There's a peace restored on the horizon, calmer seas on the horizon, a better day on the horizon, a brighter hope on the horizon. I choose to look beyond the chaos, and I choose to seek the Savior's promise that even in this madness, my world will not be shaken, because you hold me and you go before me.
So in the Bible, the ideas of heaven and earth are ways of talking about God's space and our space.
So I understand our space really well. We live here. There's trees, rivers, mountains. But my understanding of God's space gets a little fuzzy.
And what we do get in the Bible are images trying to help us grasp God's space, which is basically inconceivable to us.
So these are two very different types of spaces.
Yes, they're different in their nature, but here's what's really interesting is that in the Bible, these are not always separate spaces. So think of heaven and earth as like different dimensions that can overlap in the same exact space.
So we talk a lot about going to heaven after we die, but this idea of heaven and earth overlapping, we don't talk a lot about that.
Which is kind of crazy because the union of heaven and earth is what the story of the Bible is all about. How they were once fully united and then driven apart, and about how God is bringing them back together once again.
So let's go back to the beginning, where heaven and earth, they're completely overlapping.
Yeah, this is what the Bible's description of the Garden of Eden is all about. It's a place where God and humanity dwelt together perfectly, no separation, and humans then partner with God in building a flourishing, beautiful world and so on.
But as humans, we wanted to do things a different way. We wanted God out, and we wanted to create a world apart from him.
Yeah, so we have these two spaces now. And the Bible actually uses lots of different kinds of words and phrases to refer to these two spaces to make a clear distinction.
So you've said that these spaces can overlap, though. So explain how that works.
Yeah, this is where we have to start talking about temples. Because in the biblical world, you experience God's presence by going to a temple. That's where heaven and earth overlap.
Now, there are two types of temples described in the Bible. One is a tabernacle, basically a tent that was built by Moses. And the other was this massive building made by Solomon.
And these temples were decorated with fruit trees and flowers and images of angels and all kinds of gold and jewels and so on. And these are designed to make you feel like you're going back to the garden. And at the center of the temple was a place called the Holy of Holies, which was like the hot spot of God's presence.
Now we can go and be with God again.
But not so fast, because the temple also creates a problem. So God's space is full of his presence and goodness and justice and beauty, but human space is full of sin and injustice and the ugliness that results.
So how do these spaces overlap if they're so different and they're in conflict with each other?
This was resolved through animal sacrifice.
Yeah, that's kind of weird. What do animal sacrifices have to do with this?
Yeah, the idea is this. Animal sacrifices, somehow they absorb the sin when the animal dies in your place. And it creates a clean space, so to speak, where you are now free to enter into the temple and be in God's presence.
Okay, so if I'm an Israelite and I live in Jerusalem, I might be able to be in God's presence. But you said the story of the Bible is all of heaven and earth reuniting.
Right. So we have to keep going in the story where we come to Jesus in the New Testament. And in the Gospel of John, we hear this claim that God became human in Jesus and made his dwelling among us. Now, this word dwelling is really curious. It means he set up a tabernacle among us. And so what John is claiming right here is that Jesus is a temple. He is now the place where heaven and earth overlap.
What's interesting about Jesus is that he isn't staying in this safe, clean space. He's running around hanging out with sinners. He's healing people of their sicknesses and forgiving people of their sins.
He's basically creating little pockets of heaven where people can be in God's presence, but he's doing it out there in the middle of the world of sin and death.
And he keeps telling everyone that the kingdom of heaven is at hand.
And he even told his followers to pray regularly that God's kingdom come and that his will be done here on earth just as it is in heaven.
But a lot of people are threatened by Jesus and they kill him, which seems to spoil this whole plan to reunite heaven and earth.
But we have to go back to a scene earlier on in Jesus' story where John the Baptist saw Jesus and said, "Behold, this is the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world."
So Jesus isn't just talked about as being a temple, he's also talked about as being the temple sacrifice.
Yeah, so the cross is now the place where Jesus absorbs sin to create a clean space that is not limited like animal sacrifices. Jesus' sacrifice has the power to keep spreading and reuniting more and more of heaven and earth.
And this is all really great, but it leaves one big question in my mind, which is, what happens when I die? Don't I just fly over to God's space to be with Jesus?
Yeah, so a few times in the New Testament, we learn that Christians will be with Jesus in heaven after they die, but that is not the focus of the Bible story. The focus is on how heaven and earth are being reunited through Jesus and will be completely brought together one day when he returns. So in the book of Revelation, we get this beautiful image of the Garden of Eden, now in the form of a city, coming to end the age of sin and death by redeeming all of human history in a renewed creation. And God's space and human space completely overlap once again.
Okay, so last time we looked at how we can get back or how we can reclaim faith in our day or in our age of cynicism. And today I want us to discover how we can do the same but with story, how we can get back to story, how we can reclaim story, how we can reclaim the art of story in our culture of relativity. What even is the story to begin with? Quite obviously, as a church message, when I talk about story, I am ultimately talking about the story that God is telling, and the story that God is telling through the Bible. So what even is the story that the Bible is telling? Is it a story that we can believe? Is it a story that we even need anymore? Is it a story that we can rely on? Is it a story that can speak into my life here and now in 2021? Because it seems to be a trend nowadays, especially among millennials, to be what's beautifully been called a post-Bible Christian, where this story of the Bible doesn't feel like it lines up with what science is telling us, and what our lives are telling us, and what the culture around us is telling us. So just like we're seeing this kickback against being labelled evangelical, thanks to the likes of people like Donald Trump, and just like how we're seeing this kind of negative kickback against being called religious, and so people just saying, please don't, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual. And just like how now we're seeing this kickback against church, so I'll get my teaching from podcasts and live stream sermons, thank you very much. Now we're also seeing this kickback against the Bible. And so I want to give us just three things that have helped me with my journey and my relationship, albeit sometimes digging my heels in and kicking and screaming, three things that have helped me with my journey and my relationship with the Bible. First point is this: the Bible is human and divine. Yes, it is God-breathed. Yes, it is inspired by the divine, but it is also written by humans, at least in part about humans. You see, too often I'd be desperately trying to keep hold of the divinity of the Bible, and then finding these human fingerprints just messing it all up and getting in the way and confusing things and disrupting stuff. But more recently, especially during my own kind of personal studies during the lockdowns of last year, I've come to notice and appreciate more and more this process of trying to see what the biblical authors are doing. Looking at how the themes are being developed and grown and evolved from chapter to chapter and from book to book. Noticing these structures and these patterns in individual books themselves, but also how they relate and respond to the other books around them. Looking at themes and genres like poetry and history and parable and apocalyptic and letter writing and documentary and biography and autobiography and on and on and on. just like really paying more attention to the humanity in the pages of the Bible. The humanity of the Bible. That sounds like a kind of phrase or statement that would get you kicked out of church. But the more closely I looked at the humanity of the Bible, the closer it is I got to the divinity of the Bible. It's kind of like it leaks out. And it's by struggling and by wrestling with the Bible's humanity, that's when I really started seeing and appreciating God's word. See, as you read the Bible, you actually see how the people who wrote it, and why it was being written the way it was being written, and who it was being written by, and who it was written to, and where all of this fits into human history. But one thing that you don't read about in the Bible is how it was dropped in its completed form, in its completed King James Version leather-bound form from heaven. You don't read that. What we do read about is real people with real lives and real problems and real struggles and real issues being used in their words and their actions to point other people towards God. We see it on page 1 of the Bible, where God creates and wills humanity and then gives humanity the ability to create. That God's will is active through humanity's will, stewarding or ruling God's world on God's behalf. The entire biblical story is about divinity through humanity. God's will coming into the world through human will. And God's Spirit works in humans and through humans, not making us less human. The plan, the overall theme of this isn't about taking us somewhere else and making us less like ourselves. It's not about making us less human. It's actually about making us more human. Jesus even comes into our world not to teach us to be more divine, but to show us how to be fully and truly human. So the Bible is both divine and human. My second point is that the Bible is literary genius. Every word and everything going on is designed for maximum impact when it comes to the Bible. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is there by coincidence. Nothing has been put in there without every possible thing being thought about. You read a phrase, you read a word, and it hyperlinks you back to a previous story. And that story sheds light on the story you previously read. But that also jumps you back to another story. And that light sheds light on the second story, which sheds light on the first story, and on and on and on. It's kind of like when they talk about music. If you find an artist or a band that you really like, you're told to don't just like that band, but find out who influenced that band and go and listen to them. And then find out who influenced that band and go and listen to them. And it jumps back and back and back. And the things that you learn back here influence what you are learning right here. We see it today when we watch a series on Netflix, or we watch a film, or we read a book with these amazing, intricate plot twists, and all of the designs and the amazing characters and the incredible backstories and the inspiring storylines. Maybe some of us even here today have favourite directors for movies. Maybe your favourite's Martin Scorsese, for the really kind of gritty, dirty, real kind of movies. Perhaps it's Quentin Tarantino. It's all about the dialogue and the social commentary. Maybe you like Terrence Malick with those beautiful and sweeping cinematographic kind of scenes that's shown. Maybe you're more of a J.J. Abrams fan. The depth of characters and the storylines. Perhaps for you it's Michael Bay. You just love transforming cars and explosions. It could be Steven Spielberg, John Hughes, Stanley Kubrick, Alfred Hitchcock, Wes Anderson, Tim Burton, Christopher Nolan, James Cameron, George Lucas, Spike Lee, Peter Jackson, Ridley Scott, Wes Anderson, Sofia Coppola. We could go on and on and on. But a good filmmaker or a good TV director or even a good musician or an author or an artist knows exactly what to do and what not to do. They know what to show and exactly what not to show. They know the rules so that they know when to break them. And even though the Bible is ancient Jewish literature, it's so nuanced and it's so sophisticated and it's so well crafted. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Have we got any Star Wars fans out there in YouTube today? Any fans of Star Wars? Well, Star Wars shows us something of what I'm trying to get at here in this second point. In the movie Empire Strikes Back, when Luke travels in search of his wise old sage, this Jedi master, where he meets Yoda, this weird little green thing that talks backwards. But what does Yoda do when he's trying to teach Luke in those scenes? Yoda doesn't beat on Luke, other than with his staff occasionally, which he does. He doesn't beat on Luke and reveal who he really is by screaming and shouting and threatening him. No. Instead, Yoda is patient. He's patient with this ignorant young man. Just like how the Bible is patient with ignorant us. Yoda doesn't force or rush Luke's transformation and his awakening. Why? Because Luke has to discover it for himself. And I'm convinced, I am certain that this is how the Bible works on us and on our lives today as well. You see, the biblical authors are literary ninjas. They're at the top of their game and they are dealing with massive issues like identity and purpose and love and hope and fear and grace. So you can take a theme and you can follow its thread through the pages of the Bible. Humanity in the first pages of the Bible, all about this idea of defining and then redefining good and evil. Adam and Eve in the garden with the fruit. And that narrative can be seen throughout the pages that come. That narrative comes through it all. Man and woman taking for themselves, defining for themselves. Two characters, human and life. Literally what Adam and Eve's names mean. Human and life. And then just look out for every encounter where we see these themes popping up. The idea of humanity or of life and of seeing and of making decisions and defining what is right or what is good and evil and the taking for themselves. All these echoes throughout the Bible. If you've got your Bibles, just look with me if you don't believe. Genesis chapter 16. Genesis chapter 16. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, but she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. So she said to Abram, "The Lord has kept me from having children. Go sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her." Abram agreed to what Sarai said. So after Abram had been living in Canaan 10 years, Sarai, his wife, took her Egyptian slave and gave her to her husband to be his wife. He slept with Hagar and she conceived. When she knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. Then Sarai said to Abram, "You are responsible for the wrong that I am suffering. I put my slave in your arms, and now that she knows she is pregnant, she despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me." "Your slave is in your hands," Abram said. "Do with her whatever you think best, whatever you see right, whatever you define as good." Then Sarai ill-treated Hagar, so she fled from her. Abram and Sarai wanting children, but they don't think that they can. And so they use their Egyptian slave. They try and fix it themselves. They do what is good in their own eyes. And they take her and they use her. It's these same themes from Genesis 3, the original fall story. It's the same themes. It's the same ideas. It's the same words. Let's see another one. Just back a couple of pages in chapter 8, Genesis chapter 8. Again, another well-known story, starting in verse 13. Genesis 8:13. By the first day of the first month of Noah's 601st year, the water had dried up from the earth. Noah then removed the covering from the ark and saw that the surface of the ground was dry. By the 27th day of the second month, the earth was completely dry. Then God said to Noah, "Come out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons and their wives. Bring out every kind of living creature that is with you, the birds, the animals, and all the creatures that move along the ground, so they can multiply on earth and be fruitful and increase in number upon it." So Noah came out, together with his sons and his wife and his sons' wives, all the animals and all the creatures that move along the ground and all the birds, everything that moves on land, came out of the ark, one kind after another. Can you hear those echoes and those phrases and those words that are just pulled straight out of Genesis 1? So Noah steps off the ark. We'll just jump on ahead a little bit more. Genesis chapter 9. Then God blessed Noah and his sons, saying to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth. The fear and dread of you will fall on all the beasts of the earth, and all the birds of the sky, and on every creature that moves along the ground, and on all the fish in the sea. They are given into your hands. Everything that lives and moves about will be food for you. Just as I gave you green plants, now I give you everything." And then jump down a little bit further into verse 18 of chapter 9. The sons of Noah who came out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham was the father of Canaan. These were the three sons of Noah, and from them came the people who were scattered over the whole earth. Noah, a man of the soil, proceeded to plant a vineyard. When he drank some of its wine, he became drunk and lay uncovered inside his tent. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw his father naked and told his two brothers outside. But Shem and Japheth took a garment and laid it across their shoulders. Then they walked in backwards and covered their father's naked body. Their faces were turned the other way so that they would not see their father naked. When Noah woke from his wine and found out that his youngest son had done to him, he said, "Cursed be Canaan, the lowest of slaves. He will be to his brother." He also said, "Praise be to the Lord, the God of Shem. May Canaan be the slave of Shem. May God extend Japheth's territory, and may Japheth live in tents of Shem, and may Canaan be the slave of Japheth." So Noah steps off the ark and he's like, yes, a new start, a fresh beginning. Things can be better. Like he's coming into 2021 all excited. He even, we see, plants a garden. There's that key again. But then he grows grapes and he takes that fruit. He sees that it is good and he makes wine and he gets drunk and he gets naked. Again, Genesis 3. And his son is cursed. Again, Genesis 3. The same ideas from Genesis 3. The same words. It's all literary genius. Third point, the Bible is a unified story. Poetry, prose, narrative, discourse, historical, apocalyptic, but it all comes together to tell one unified story. And the climax, the point behind the point, the layer underneath the layer underneath the layer, the climax of every story is always Jesus. It's a story, a beautiful story, both human and divine, written by literary geniuses that ultimately and always points us to Jesus, who is a person, not a story. The Bible isn't trying to just entertain us with weird stories. It's trying to point out the fundamental need for something that we can't do ourselves. The fundamental need that we all have for someone to do what we can't do ourselves. And the answer isn't found on another page in a story. It's found in a person. It's found in Jesus Christ. It's the living reality. It's Jesus, revealed through Spirit and through each other and through the Bible and through our church community and through nature around us, and on and on and on, all telling the story, all telling this one unified story. So as we read, as we wrestle, as we study, as we struggle with this beautifully confusing and confusingly beautiful text, there's no reason to be suspicious. There's no reason to be cynical about it. The Bible allows all the space and time that we could ever need to ask questions. It's been read and wrestled and studied and struggled with for hundreds and hundreds of years. And there is no question that we could possibly come up with to ask that hasn't already been asked. The Bible is so clear on the bigger picture kind of stuff. But then you can go deeper and deeper and deeper, and there's all these nuances and these rich layers and levels that as we go deep, as we go deep, these levels and layers will go as deep as we are willing to go. And then some. Then deeper and deeper and deeper. Every time you think you've found the bottom of it, every time you think you've got to a point, there's a layer behind that, and there's a thing underneath that. The Bible is so clear on all of this stuff. So as you read and study the Bible, may you come to realise that actually the Bible is reading and studying you. And may we find that this story still has so much to teach us. This story still has so much to say to us in this age of relativism that we find ourselves in. May you find that this story that you are reading is reading you. Grace and peace.